The near future. A virus destroys 99% of humanity. There are 513 survivors left in the world. They are all forced to live on a small island in the Baltic Sea, as the rest of the Earth is uninhabitable. A woman gives birth to a baby. The people around her congratulate the happy mother, but her father says goodbye to her. He leaves the house accompanied by family and close friends, and goes to a high cliff. A television journalist films the event, narrating that regardless of how tough times may be, new life arrives while the old departs. Hence today, the grandfather, following the laws established on the island, will sacrifice himself so his granddaughter may live. The elderly man bids farewell to the people and jumps off the cliff at the same time as his daughter gives birth to a second child, thereby creating a problem for the island's inhabitants. The thing is, Hilo Land has a population of 513 people. Birth rates are strictly controlled, and if a baby is born unexpectedly, someone must sacrifice themselves voluntarily or forcibly. The community leader, Beatrice, maintains a social ranking. Commit a good deed, raise your rank, make a mistake, lower it. The person with number 513 is the first candidate for sacrifice. All important matters are decided by voting, creating an illusion of democracy. And so, this time, the TV reports those who are at the very bottom of the list. 513 turns out to be a friend of Beatrice's son, who tries to cheer his friend by reminding him that if he refuses to jump voluntarily, he will simply be thrown into the sea. 512 is an elderly, weak woman who is no longer of any use, and 513 is a man named Etienne who has wronged the community. Later, everyone goes about their business. Dr. Merrick, accompanied by his son Linus, heads to the laboratory where they unsuccessfully search for a vaccine against the virus that has devastated the world. The boy is eager to go to the mainland because that's the only place where they can find the necessary resources, but his father is strictly against it. It's deadly dangerous, and the things they need are delivered by people who have adapted to life on the coast. Dr. Merrick's assistant, Judith, reminds him of the daily rounds of the island's inhabitants, and they start with number 513. Etienne stole painkillers from the pharmacy for which his rating immediately dropped, and he was punished by being deprived of food. Now he might even die. The other islanders go to the shop where they can take a strictly defined amount of food. Unexpectedly, one of the children breaks a jar of pickles, and Henrik advises his friend to give the boy his food. He immediately does so in front of everyone, thereby raising his rating from a dangerous position, while the others praise the man for his kindness. Henrik suggests to Etienne's wife, Lisa, to provide him with intimate services in exchange for some food for her husband. Noticing this, Beatrice asks her son to restrain himself, but the boy is too confident in his impunity. Later, Merrick returns to the laboratory, where it is revealed that it houses people brought from the mainland on whom the doctor tests new drugs, hoping to find a cure for the virus. But so far, all his test subjects have died. Meanwhile, Lisa goes to Henrik, but their activity is interrupted by an alarm signal. Illegal immigrants are approaching the island. The island's defense commander orders them to turn back, and when they refuse to do so, Henrik shoots them all, even though the people had already turned back. Later, all the rest residents are gathered for a vote. The one who shared his food with the boy moves up, and now it's time to decide who will sacrifice themselves. The people choose Etienne. Then Lisa tells about Henrik's actions. Unexpectedly, other girls confess that they too were his victims. A scandal erupts, and Beatrice can do nothing to save her son. To calm the citizens, she announces his exile from the island. In the morning, Linus announces his trip to the mainland to his father. Although Merrick is against it, the boy does not intend to stay under his wing. The doctor goes to Beatrice, but she refuses to save his son when hers is dying. The boys get into the boat. Only Henrik is without a protective suit. On the way, one of the militants, Heinz, reminds everyone that the mainland is very dangerous, and if one falls behind the group, they might even be eaten. On the island, a water supply malfunction alarm goes off. Beatrice learns that their engineer frequently goes missing and orders him to be followed. One of the staff finds a radio transmitter, which is strictly forbidden on the island. Meanwhile, the boat from the island reaches Herg. Henrik tries to refuse to go ashore, but Heinz beats him and throws him onto the dock. At the same time, the engineer asks Beatrice to allow his wife onto the island, and she promises to think about it. The commander leaves Linus in the boat and leads the others to a meeting with the Count, who controls this part of the city. The exchange begins. The people from the island supply the Count with produce grown in greenhouses, and he gives them medical drugs that his people collect in abandoned hospitals. At the same time, Linus disobeys orders and goes ashore, where he meets a guy who offers to supply him with medicines found in a ship's laboratory. Linus agrees to go with him, unaware that his squad is already returning to the boat. The guys enter the dock where Linus is handed a whole box of flu vaccine, but in return, the the people demand passage to the island. Linus tries to convince them that he's not the one who makes such decisions, and offers to give him the medicines in exchange for lobbying for them. At this time, his group is attacked by slum dwellers, and Heinz's mask is torn off, but his friends come to the rescue and fend them off. They make it to the boat, but realizing that Linus is not on board, decide to leave without him. Linus sees this and runs after them. He manages to jump onto the boat, but his protective suit tears, and the guy who gave him the medicines, who was running after him, is killed. Upon returning to the island, both the injured are taken to quarantine, but Linus manages to hide the bottle obtained on the mainland. The Count's people find the dead boy and discover a vial of vaccine on him. On the island, Linus tells his father about what happened and hands over the vaccine. His father begins to examine his health, fearing infection. Heinz is also brought into quarantine, but the boy clearly does not feel well. Moreover, he develops a rash, the first sign of a viral disease. The people on the island, learning about Heinz's infection, become agitated. Later, Merrick examines the vaccine brought by Linus, and it turns out to be real. The doctor would like to find out what else is on that ship, but for that, he needs to release Linus from quarantine, which is currently impossible. The doctor tells Beatrice everything, but she categorically demands to keep everything secret, fearing a riot. Merrick gives Heinz everything he has, but the boy gets worse. Meanwhile, Henrik wanders through the city and meets an elderly woman who exchanges beautiful trinkets for food. The boy approaches her, but after taking his keychain, she refuses to give him anything. Then Henrik removes his clothes, showing off his healthy body, which delights the old woman. She has not seen normal people for a long time. She takes Henrik with her to the island. Beatrice unexpectedly offers Lisa to become her assistant, saying she is not at all angry about her actions in Henrik's exile. This becomes known, which raises the leader's rating, as she supports justice. Merrick, for the first time, allows Judith into the quarantine rooms, where she sees 2 subjects brought from the mainland. The woman is horrified, as no one on the island knows about this, but she has to start working and takes blood for analysis from a young girl. The doctor explains what and how he does it, and Judith is again amazed at his heartlessness. On the mainland, the old woman takes Henrik to her dwelling, located in an old theater, gives him a new suit and makes him undergo alcohol disinfection, but she asks him not to play with fire like his previous friend. At this time on the island, despite Merrick's efforts, Heinz dies, and Linus discovers a rash on himself. In Hamburg, Henrik asks the old woman to take him to the Count, but she refuses, which angers him greatly. He follows her and finds the place where she keeps her treasures, and then beats the old woman to death. On the island, Beatrice announces the death of Heinz and blames the commander. The girl is outraged, as it is the leader who makes them sail to the mainland. The youth supports her protest and begins to cough demonstratively, causing panic among the adults who immediately scatter, not finishing the vote. Nonetheless, the commander's rating decreases, and Beatrice introduces parental responsibility for their children's actions. And then, one of the women discovers that her daughter is pregnant. This unplanned pregnancy could lead to big problems, but the girl categorically refuses to get rid of the child despite her mother's pleas. Meanwhile, the engineer informs his wife about the opening on the island following Heinz's death and promises to do everything so she can come. A couple spying on him hears this conversation, but unexpectedly the woman refuses to report him because he only wants to reunite with his wife. At the same time, in the laboratory, the condition of the test subject girl worsens. Judith sympathizes with her, and she reveals that her brother, who has a family, sold her to the island, and she does not hold a grudge against him as she managed to do something good. Linus shows his father the rash, which does not surprise the doctor, since he immediately realized his son was infected. The boy asks to be used for experiments, although his father cannot bring himself to do it. In Hamburg, young people who found the medicines passed to Linus are brought to the Count. The leader asks to be shown the ship, but they say the only one who knew the way there has died. The Count offers to use them to join him, and asks to find the ship. The leader of the youth group asks to take them along because they are sure he wants to capture Heligoland, as it is the only place with the doctor capable of making a cure. The Count makes a promise. Merrick begins to study his son, who asks him to promise that he will find that ship with the laboratory. Later, the doctor goes to the former commander and asks for her help to get to the mainland. She promises to do this if he can release her from the cage where she was unjustly locked up. On the mainland, Henrik falls into an ambush by a group that feeds on humans. He confesses who he is and asks to be handed over to the Count. The cannibals take him to the Count's dwelling, and he agrees to exchange the boy for antibiotics, hoping to get a ransom from Beatrice. Meanwhile, the engineer's wife contacts his wife, informs her about the interview tomorrow, and asks her to prepare well. The Count informs Henrik that he knows about his exile, Then the boy offers to show him the island's defense weaknesses to capture it. Later, the engineer's wife arrives at the designated place and passes the first round for the position of pharmacist. And Merrick notes a deterioration in Linus's health. The next day, the two women who perform the best in the testing must prove to the islanders that one of them deserves the doctor's position. One of them is the engineer's wife, a practicing pharmacist, and the other, named Daniela, calls herself a surgeon. At the same time, on the island, Etienne finds a bottle of schnapps in the desk and gives it to the windmill mechanic. Meanwhile, the commission consisting of the island's leadership conducts the final testing. Daniela answers all the questions correctly, but the pharmacist also demonstrates good knowledge. Then, Beatrice proposes a vote, and with Merrick's final decisive vote, the commission chooses Daniela, causing the engineer to have a nervous breakdown. He attacks Merrick, but Beatrice shortens him, as no one had promised him anything specific. Later, Daniela arrives on the island, and after the welcoming party leaves the dock, people from the cannibal gang who arrived on the island illegally are found on the boat. The engineer contacts his wife, but she advises him to forget her and move on, and they show Daniela her new home. At night, unable to resist the temptation, the windmill mechanic drinks the Fanshan apps and doesn't see the engineer climb the windmill and break one of its blades. In the morning, seeing the recording of the incident, the drunk man climbs up, falls, and hangs high above the ground, his broken leg caught on the ladder. The ambulance takes the injured man, brings him to Merrick, who decides to amputate the leg, and asks to call Daniela. But the woman acts strangely, as if she doesn't know what to do. Merrick and Judith conduct the surgery, after which the doctor questions the new surgeon, and she suddenly confesses that she was a Pilates trainer, so she knows the body structure. She just memorized a surgery book because she needed to get to the island by the Count's order. She will guard him, because soon everything here will change. But then it turns out that Judith heard their conversation. Moreover, she has long known about the doctor's violations that he committed for his son, and now she intends to report everything to Beatrice. But Daniela attacks the doctor's assistant and kills her. Later, together with Daniela, they throw Judith's body into the sea. That evening, Lisa tries to convince Beatrice to soften the new law that makes parents responsible for their children, as people don't like it. But the boss quickly puts the assistant in her place. Everything will be as she decides, and she inquires about Judith's whereabouts, but no one has seen the woman. Then Beatrice calls Merrick, but he also says he doesn't know where his assistant is. In the evening, the island police arrest the engineer. Linus's condition worsens, and Merrick resuscitates him, performing intubation. However, the boy is very weak, and the father cries over his body. However, he is called to a girl who has lost her child, and it becomes clear that her mother and the island's healer Laura are involved. At this time, Beatrice visits the mechanic who lost his leg, and tries to find out if Judith was at his surgery, but the man remembers nothing but pain. Beatrice accuses him of drunkenness, and promises to expel him from the island. Then she inspects the clinic room, and finds a knocked-out tooth behind the baseboard. After that, she comes to Merrick and accuses him of murdering Judith. The doctor confesses to it, but states he would have preferred to kill her. Beatrice decides to pin everything on the engineer, as he can no longer be trusted. They barely manage to repair the turbine he broke, so he will be responsible for Judith's murder as well. The doctor tries to object, but the woman reminds him of his son's dire situation, and Merrick complies. And on the mainland, the Count announces to his people, among whom is now Henrik, that they are sailing to new shores. The next day on the island, a trial is held for the engineer. Beatrice secures a guilty verdict for him for sabotaging the turbine and murdering Judith, corroborated by the blood on the man's shirt. But when Merrick refuses to testify, Daniela takes it upon herself, confirming that she conducted the DNA analysis, and the blood belonged to the deceased. The man tries to appeal to the islanders, as he has lived there, and they know him as a law-abiding citizen. But a vote decides his fate. The man is taken to the seashore, where the entire population of the island gathers, ties him up, and leaves him at the surf's edge, watching as the tide rises. When the unfortunate man's cries cease, the people leave. Only Merrick remains on the shore, living through his cowardice. Later, he goes to his son, and suddenly starts telling him how it all began. He remembers that day, as if it were yesterday. The whole family was supposed to go to the island of Heligoland, but when he and his son arrived at the ferry, it turned out that his wife and mother, Tessa, was delayed in her laboratory. The woman was an epidemiologist and was trying to find an antiviral for a new disease that was destroying the world. She calls her husband and tells him she will come tomorrow, as the institute has good security, and she is safe. Merrick and Linus reach the island and go to the store, where a crowd wanting to buy groceries gathers at the door, but the store owner doesn't let people in. There's practically nothing left, and the delivery from the mainland will only be tomorrow. Nonetheless, the doctor manages to sneak inside, where he meets Beatrice working as a senior salesperson. She helps the doctor choose groceries for his son, and noticing the commotion at the entrance, calms the crowd by promising big discounts. The next morning, the people leave, promising to come back in the morning, and the store owner insults Beatrice for unilaterally deciding what to do with his property. The man berates her, not noticing the silent approval of the store employees to the woman's actions. Later, Beatrice addresses her colleagues, reminding them that they will have to survive on their own, and no boss will help them, so they need to take matters into their own hands. Meanwhile, the community leader asked Merrick to help him check everyone on the island for their health. He intends to cut off communication with the mainland to save the people from infection, and wants Merrick to take the place of the doctor who fled. The man contacts his wife, but Tessa can't come because she hasn't finished her analysis yet. In the morning, Merrick goes to Laura, who was then working as a doctor's assistant, and she shows him the new clinic. The next day, Beatrice tidies up the store, and the arriving director sees that the windows are taped up and the doors fortified. The woman explains that they need protection, and they're not going to wait to be attacked over cans of food. The man loses his temper, but Beatrice skillfully diffuses the conflict. Soon, customers arrive, but they are not allowed inside. One of the salespeople meets them at the doorstep and offers to pass a list of the products they need, promising to gather everything and hand it over to them. People are outraged. One of the men tries to break inside, but Beatrice skillfully calms him down and declares that the salespeople are armed and they will not tolerate any more disorder. Seeing silhouettes with weapons behind her, the crowd calms down and shops according to the new rules. The troublemaker leaves. In the evening, Beatrice looks out the window and sees men hiding in the darkness, but says nothing to the director, who is outraged by her behavior. However, the woman skillfully manipulates him, expressing sympathy that his children are somewhere on the mainland, and he leaves. But almost immediately, he is captured by armed men, led by the troublemaker from the day. They demand to be led inside, threatening to kill the director. Beatrice turns to the salespeople, outlining the situation. If they let them in, they lose everything but save the director. If they don't, the director faces trouble. The salespeople vote against opening the doors, and when Beatrice informs the robbers about this decision, the troublemaker pulls the trigger, and the director dies. Using the shock of the moment, Beatrice orders them to drop their weapons. They comply and run away. Beatrice arms the salespeople for real and orders them to find the troublemaker. All this is witnessed by her underage son. The next day, Beatrice goes to the main island police officer and invites him to organize self-defense. He refuses, and then Beatrice shows him the bound troublemaker lying in her trunk. This is the disorder waiting for the island if they don't take power into their own hands. Later, Merrick comes to Beatrice as she has gathered medicines in the store because the pharmacy has been robbed several times, and she confidently promises him protection. Worried, the doctor turns to the community leader, concerned about Beatrice's overly militant behavior, and he gathers people for a meeting. But Beatrice mocks his intentions to manage without violence. She orders the director's killer to be brought in and tells about his crime. The woman skillfully manipulates opinion and heats the crowd to the point that men attack the killer and brutally beat him. The police take Beatrice's side. She asks for a vote for his execution, and people unanimously support her. The man is dragged to the surf, and as he drowns in the tide, Beatrice delivers a speech about how they need to build a new world to survive. They will become good later. Later, Merrick contacts his wife and asks her to come, as an angry crowd breaks into her institute. He tells her about what happened on the island while people convinced of the doctor's guilt kill everyone and enter her office. Merrick watches in horror as the crowd kills his wife, powerless to help. In the evening of the same day, Beatrice comes to Laura and offers to rid the island of troublemakers to make it governable. Seeing a promotional calendar on the wall with the number 53, she names this number as optimal for the island's population. When the woman is horrified, Beatrice hands her insulin, promising to supply her with it regularly, as otherwise, she would not survive. The next day, the coast washes up numerous bodies, apparently thrown overboard from some ship. Laura and Beatrice take their infected blood and start injecting the undesirables with infectious shots, passing them off as vaccines. Some die immediately, and rumors of infection spread across the island. The women ask Merrick to help in testing the islanders, and although he is grieving his wife's death, he joins them. Later, Laura and Beatrice announce the surnames of the infected. Merrick notices that these are the ones who did not want to submit to the new leader, but she reminds him that only 513 people can live on the island, and she urges the man to do his duty and find a vaccine. One night, all the supposedly infected are herded onto a ferry and sent into the unknown. Watching the departing ship, Beatrice reminds Merrick and Laura that the events of this day are dedicated to their salvation. Merrick swears he will find a vaccine and cure everyone, and Beatrice will answer for everything, finishing the story. The father asks his son to forgive him, but the boy asks him to leave and dies. Later, Merrick shows a recorded confession to Laura, Daniela, and the cleaning lady. He intends to publish it so the islanders know the truth, but Daniela, threatening with a weapon, takes the cassette and breaks it, reminding him that the Count is already on his way here, and soon everything will change. She asks Merrick to create a vaccine, and then suddenly confesses that she is pregnant and would never bring a child to a place where people eat each other. Meanwhile, on the mainland, the Count and Henrik watch young people bring them a ship with a modern laboratory and loads of medical drugs on board. Now, Merrick will have everything he needs. At the same time, Beatrice enjoys swimming in the pool, unaware that this ship is already sailing to the island, and a local priest becomes the victim of cannibals who have illegally arrived on the island. The picture does not shine with interesting inventions. A world stricken by a virus does not differ much from our own, but the speed at which a transformation occurs in the human mind, after which the usual norms of morality are easily forgotten or successfully ignored, is striking. The herd instinct quickly gains mundane functionality, forcing people to simply survive, which seems rather questionable.